Namaste. Today we are discussing Mars. Mars in Vedic astrology. What placements of Mars in your birth chart does to you? What is a strong Mars in your chart and a weak one? But first, let's have some fun. And since we are talking about the planet Mars, it's hard not to mention the one person who puts Mars into our collective consciousness. The Mars boy. Caecus Maximus, as he's called. Some people call him elongated muskrat. Mr. Elon Musk himself, the Mars boy. Honestly, this man himself brought Mars into public consciousness in a strange way, since H.G. Wells brought it to us in the War of the Worlds, if you remember that. In 2016, Elon Musk said humans would land on Mars by 2024. Well, that date came and went. He moved it. Then he moved it again. Well, as of this year, the target is somewhere around 2029. Maybe 2031. We'll see. And in February, he pushed the whole Mars program back another 5 to 7 years to focus on the moon instead, apparently. 10 years, same claim, different dates, every single time. And you see, here's what happens to us listening to this. Psychologically, when someone keeps doing that to us, making unrealistic promises feel good to us first. It gives you a real goal. Then it falls through. And that gap, the gap between what you believed and what actually happened, that gap creates a very specific kind of stress. It's called cognitive dissonance. You see, here's what's happening. Your mind trying to hold two conflicting realities at once. To Mars or not to Mars. And enough of that would be as over and over. It doesn't just go away. It turns into anxiety. You start doubting your own judgment. And you start doubting the person who made the promise in the first place. And so today's video isn't about Musk. It's not about Musk. It's not about whether this is a grift or a genuine mission. I don't know his heart. And honestly, neither does anyone posting about him online. But the pattern itself, the pattern to promise something enormous, moving the dates, promising it again. This is not a new pattern, this is an old pattern. It's the oldest trick in the book of charlatans. in the book of con artists and tricksters, actually going back centuries. Whether that's what's happening here or not, the pattern deserves to be called out. Because most of us have felt what it does on the receiving end. So what this video is actually about is what Mars is, physically and astrologically, according to Vedic astrology, and why it's nearly impossible for a human being to survive in that atmosphere at all. And why Elon's own Mars in his birth chart, Elon Musk has Mars exalted at its strongest in the sign of Capricorn. Mars exalted in his chart does two very different things to him at the same time. Sure, bravery, you face fears without running away. Mars exalted. Energy, you have great stamina to get things done fast. Focus, you're very ambitious and you fight to win. A strong and enormous capability to fight. That's the first thing. But also a mind with no ceiling on it. We'll come back to that. First, let's talk about the planet itself. Mars has an atmosphere. Well, barely an atmosphere. Less than 1% the pressure of Earth's atmosphere. Less than 1%. Mostly carbon dioxide. No oxygen to breathe. No magnetic field wrapped around it the way Earth has. Which means solar radiation just hits the surface directly on Mars. Unfiltered. No protection. Average temperature sits around 80 degrees below zero. The soil itself is laced with chemical called perchlorate. Very toxic. Toxic to humans. A person standing on the surface of Mars without a tightly sealed suit and a sealed habitat doesn't survive minutes. That's what colonizing Mars actually means, physically. It means building oxygen from nothing. It means building warmth from nothing. Building an entire artificial world. Because the Mars atmosphere will kill you almost immediately. Mars is red. Everyone knows that. But almost nobody knows why. It's literally rust. The entire surface of that planet has been oxidizing for billions of years. Slowly turning the whole place the color of blood. And that is not a bad way to start talking about Mars in Vedic astrology, or we call it Mangal. Mangal in Vedic astrology. In Vedic astrology, Mars is not just the planet of anger. And it's not just the planet of war. It's the planet of what happens when something in you gets hurt. And instead of healing, it hardens into an armor. It goes into pure drive, into a strong will to never be hurt like that again. Today, we are going deep into Mangal, into Mars, where he shows up in your birth chart, where he's actually trying to protect. And what happens when that protection turns on to you instead? So let's start with who he is. Mangal. In the Puranas, Mars is called Mangal. Also, Kuja, meaning born of the earth. There are a few versions of his birth story, depending on which text you're reading in the Puranas. One of the texts says, he came from a drop of sweat that fell from Shiva while Shiva was in deep meditation. And the earth herself, Bhumi Devi, received it and gave it a form. Another Vedic text says that he rose directly from the earth. When Vishnu, in his boar form, lifted the world out of the cosmic ocean. Two stories. Either way, the pattern is the same. Mars comes from struggle, from something ancient that had to find its way into a form. He was raised away from his parents. He was raised by fire, by the earth itself. And he grew up fierce, quick to anger, and endless loyalty to whoever he decides to protect. He's a warrior, but not a mercenary. Mangal doesn't fight for just anyone. He fights for what is his. Yes, he only fights for what is his. You see, in the West, Mars is the god of war. Full stop. God of war. Something to be tamed, or something to be feared. In the Vedic system, Mangal is a warrior, sure. He's also your courage, your capacity to defend a boundary, your willingness to actually fight for the people, fight for the things you love. Without Mars, you don't get out of bed. You don't get out of bed on hard days. You You don't leave the relationship that's hurting you. You don't start the business, or you don't finish your degree. You see, Mars is the reason anything gets done at all. So what does Mars actually govern in a birth chart? The obvious one is courage, the willingness to act, to confront, to move toward difficulty instead of running away from it. Mars also rules your siblings, especially younger siblings. Your physical vitality, your stamina, the raw strength in your body. Mars also rules land and property. Mars rules your capacity to compete. When you have to stand up and claim that's yours, Mars is what shows up there. Where Mars sits in your chart tells you where you fight, what you're willing to go to war for, and what not to fight for, because you learned that fighting cost you too much. That's a story of Mars in the birth chart. So let's go house by house, where Mars sits in different houses. Mars in the first house. Mars in the first house gives you a body that acts fast, but thinks later. Quick temper and quick recovery. Everything what you are feeling, anger, resentment, it shows up on your face, whether you want it or not. Mars in the first house. Mars in the second house puts that fight into money, speech, and family. You may say things that may sound harsh, harsher than you mean it. Income tends to come through real hard work rather than ease. That's Mars in the second house. Very briefly, Mars in the third house is one of its strongest placement. Courage, initiative, a fierce bond with siblings, real drive toward whatever you set your mind to. That's Mars in the third house. Mars in the fourth house can create friction at home, especially in childhood. Restlessness with the idea of settling down, always moving, and a deep, sometimes hidden protectiveness over the people that you consider family. That's Mars in the fourth house. Mars in the fifth house brings intensity to romance, to creativity, and how you are as a parent. You have strong opinions, as a parent, strong passions. That's Mars in the fifth house. Mars in the sixth house is one of the classic strong placements. This is Mars fighting enemies, fighting disease and obstacles, and usually winning. Discipline, physical strength, a body built for endurance. Good placement, Mars in the sixth. Mars in the seventh house brings the same fighting energy into partnership and marriage. Relationship require real courage here in the seventh house. That's Mars in the seventh house. Mars in the eighth house is intense, deep transformation, a fascination with what's taboo and hidden. This placement can bring real resilience through real difficult times. That's Mars in the eighth house. Mars in the ninth house puts fire into your beliefs. You have strong convictions about dharma, strong convictions about what is right, a willingness to fight for your philosophy. Idealistic sometimes. That's Mars in the ninth house. Mars in the 10th house is excellent for career, drive, ambition, the willingness to work harder than almost anyone around you. Leadership that comes from action. That's Mars in the 10th house. Mars in the 11th house channels that fighting energy into goals and gains. Strong ambition for achievement. A competitive circle of friends. Income that often comes through sustained, disciplined effort. That's Mars in the 11th house. Mars in the 12th house. Mars in the 12th house is a quiet warrior. This Mars doesn't fight in public. It fights in private. It fights to prepare for the outside world. Deep spiritual discipline is very common in Mars in the 12th house. And so is the inner friction. People with Mars in the 12th house are often fighting their own demons. Now let me go over the strong Mars versus the weak Mars. A strong Mars, well placed, well aspected, gives someone real physical vitality, decisive action, the courage to protect what matters without becoming cruel about it. You see this in people who move through obstacles instead of get stuck circling them, they go straight. And I told you we'd come back to Musk, Elon Musk. Astrologers who've looked at his chart noticed something very specific. Mars exalted in Capricorn, sitting close to Rahu. If that's accurate, it's almost too fitting for what we've been talking about. Exalted Mars gives outsized capability, the kind that actually builds a rocket company from nothing. But the delusional Rahu next to it, it removes the ceiling. Not the ability, the ceiling. It's the placement of someone who can genuinely do enormous things and also promise a decade of dates that he can't keep. See, I'm telling you about Musk because most of us carry some smaller version of that in ourselves. Now let's talk about a weak or afflicted Mars looks like. It looks different to different people. Sometimes it's suppressed anger, anger that never gets expressed directly. So it leaks out sideways in irritating ways, in passive aggression, in a short fuse about small things. And also sometimes it's the opposite. Not enough fighting power at all. Someone who cannot advocate for themselves. Someone who watches their own boundaries get crossed and says nothing. Weak Mars. Now let's talk about Mars retrograde. A retrograde Mars turns the energy inwards. And now the fight becomes internal, becomes psychological. Sometimes years of processing something before it ever gets expressed outwards. And when Mars is combust meaning sitting too close to the sun, it can burn away the patience that we need. Quick to react, slower to think through. But you see, none of these is a life sentence. They are a description of the nature of things. What you do with the information is still yours to decide. And you can definitely change. Now, I want to talk about one of the most feared placement in relationships, especially long-term commitments and marriage. This is one of the most important aspects astrologers look for before a marriage happens. Very important. Mangal Dosha, Mars affliction in a person's chart. It's also called Kuja Dosha. Dosha means affliction. This is the placement people ask me about when I do a compatibility reading for couples. Mangal Dosha. happens when Mars sits in the first, second, fourth house, seventh house, eighth house, or 12th house. And it's checked from 3 different points: from the ascendant, from the moon, and Venus. Different astrology schools weigh these 3 positions differently. But the traditional view says if Mars falls in one of those 6 houses I just mentioned, from any of these 3, the ascendant, the moon, and the Venus, then Mangal Dosha is present in some degree. And I must tell you this. This has been used to frighten people, especially around marriage. Families have called off engagements over this placement. Astrologers have used it to sell fear instead of clarity. And here's honest information on Mangal Dosha. Mangal Dosha does not mean your marriage is cursed. Traditionally, the texts describe it as a placement that can bring friction, bring delay or hardship into a partnership. And in the most severe cases, even danger to a spouse. I know that thinking is kind of old. It comes from a time when marriage itself worked very differently. In those days, the fear of losing a partner at a young age was a real and constant thing. The remedies for Mangal Dosha were powerful too, and it worked. Now, you may find this amusing, but let me explain this to you. If you have Mangal Dosha, there is a remedy called Kumbha Vibah. It's a psychological healing at a deep level. Before you get married to an actual human person, you marry a banana plant or a peepal tree. You marry a banyan tree. You marry a clay pot or a gold idol of Lord Vishnu. It's a full-blown ceremony, and it still happens in some parts of India. You may be laughing now, but if you understand the healing power of this remedy, then you know. I'll leave it at that. But in modern India, what Mangal Dosha is Mars placed in a way that brings extra intensity. It brings extra friction, extra need for conscious effort into partnership. That's it. Friction. It's a description of energy. It's not a prophecy of doom. In classic texts, there are dozens of what you call cancellations. Kuja Dosha Bhaga. cancellations, where the affliction is neutralized either by the other factor's chart. If Mars sits in its own sign, or if your Mars sits in a friendly sign, or with certain benefic aspects, the dosha weakens or cancels outright. If both people in the relationship carry the same Mangal dosha placement, it cancels each other. But I want you to understand this. Mangal dosha is not a curse. That's just Mars doing what Mars does. Now come a little closer. Let me tell you about my own Mars, because I think our own experience makes it clear. My Mars Mahadasha ran from 1969 to 1976. I was born into it. I was about a year old when it started full, and 7 years old when it ended. That's my earliest childhood. My parents had a tough time physically controlling me, constantly in motion. I started running before I could really walk. My parents said that. Mars was already in motion from age 1 to age 7. In my chart, Mars sits at 5 degrees Virgo in Uttra Phalguni Nakshatra, and it falls in my 12th house. From my ascendant, Mars rules my second house of income and family, and my 7th house of partnership. So Mars governs 2 of the biggest areas of my life: money and relationship, while sitting quietly in the 12th house of spirituality and internal growth. What that actually means, in plain terms, is that my drive doesn't operate loudly. It operates in private. It operates in preparation. Mars in the 12th is not loud, and it works internally. Because Mars rules my second house, income has never come easy to me. It came through consistent, sustained effort. When I say consistent, it flows abundantly. But when I'm scattered, it suddenly dries up. I've watched that pattern play out for years before I understood why. And because my Mars rules my 7th house, my relationships have always carried that same quality. They ask for courage, they ask for direct engagement, for honesty, confrontation when something goes wrong. Every time I avoided that in a partnership, the difficulty was real. And in my chart, Mars also sits conjunct Jupiter and Ketu in my 12th house, which I've come to understand is a large part of why I have a genuine and deep pull towards moksha and spirituality. the discipline behind the practice, the consistency of it, even through the hardest years I've lived through. And that's my 12th house Mars, doing what it does. Wherever your Mars sits, whatever house it rules for you, Mars doesn't ask you to be at war with everyone around you. What he's asking you is to know what you would actually go to war for and what to stay away from. If you like to know where all of this plays in your personal chart, I can help you with that. Simply connect with me, or you can visit the link on my profile. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, where I publish 3 to 4 videos per week on the topic of Vedic wisdom, Vedic astrology, and on my site Jyoti Shakti about conscious living. I am Jyoti Shakti, and have a wonderful day ahead. Namaste.